Hello everyone and welcome to this audio podcast. In this series, the molecular storm gauge v.3. This is an audio podcast aligned to research surround in and around pediatric nephrology, coping in young people with chronic kidney disease or CKD. This is an audio podcast aligned to a storm lobostic siege and an audio podcast aligned to a Storm Robotics production. In this audio podcast, there will be a sort of an overview in and around sort of the sort of methodology, in and around the some aspects in and around the methodology of the method, methodology is sort of implemented in around this research, and also some aspects in around the interview guide, the interview guide, and aspects in around the sort of semi-structured sort of questions implemented in around the research, some aspects around the ethical approach, or ethical approval aspects and around this research. And then toward the end of this particular audio podcast, there'll be a sort of a basis in around a basis in around thematic analysis as well. So to begin with, in around the methods or the methodology. So this study, in around this investigation, it collected, the basis was to collect qualitative data from two participant groups during semi-structured, implementing sort of semi-structured interviews, and young people with CKD, with chronic kidney disease in group 1 were identified by a pediatric nephrology clinical nurse who later acted as a point of contact for the participants. And before participants, for example, attending their sort of routine healthcare appointments, the parents or guardians were contacted and provided with a sort of an overview or an introductory letter, an information sheet, and a consent form asking permission, asking sort of permission for their dependents to participate in the research. Young healthy people in group 2 who had received written sort of parental consent were recruited by a youth club over a 1-month duration, and then contacted to confirm intention to participate. All participants were informed of the aims and the objectives in around this study, on this investigation or research, and that there any data collected would be anonymized in around sort of observing what was then in around the Data Protection Act, the Data Protection Act 1988, and now obviously is aligned to the Data Protection Act. It's now referred to as the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR 2018. So in and around the sort of interview guide and semi-structured questions, so the paper that had been sort of published aligned to the sort of online sort of format of this peer-reviewed publication. There was the authors had documented that there's a supplemental table, a table that outlines the sort of interview guide and the sort of questions implemented. However, the interview guide was developed from sort of previously published literature works by Mohammed and team in 2012, and included questions, for example, on living and coping, family and friends, and plus sort of coping and planning, and in around some in around the sort of aspects around ethical approval, or the ethical sort of approach, and aligned to the ethical approval. Ethical approval for interviewing young people in Group 1 was ascertained by the National Research Ethics Service, or what's been referred to as NRES in the United Kingdom, and the Southwest Committee, which was based in two different parts, or covered two different sort of two different sort of districts, if you like, in the United Kingdom, and aligned to sort of the research and the research and development sort of department, aligned to the hospital where the young people in Group 1 were where they had been sort of recruited from, in aligned to ethical approval for Group 2 participants, comprising healthy young people. This received the approach was aligned to the University of the West of Scotland Research Ethics Committee, and this was in around April 2011, and the ethics approval in aligned to the young people with CKD, chronic kidney disease, where the ethics approval had been deemed in around June 2012. So in line to this also, in line to this, there will be in line to this now in line to this particular audio podcast, I'm going to highlight a little bit. There'll be a little bit of an overview in around thematic analysis, because more often than not, researchers can who might be, for example, who might be new to sort of the analysis approach, in context of sort of in context of similar research, for example, where it can be challenging. So I'm going to highlight some aspects in around around thematic analysis. So thematic analysis provides a sort of a flexible and useful analysis sort of tool, which can potentially provide a rich and detailed yet complex account of data that's being collected. There's works by Boyazatis in 1998, Tried Sterling in 2001, and others, including Tuckett in 2005. In the research that that had been published, works, there was an overview in around the phases involved in thematic analysis, and so this includes, for example, becoming familiar in around the phases. There's becoming familiar with the insights, generating initial ciphered context, identifying themes regarding to main subject area and focus, and studying the subject areas carefully, and placing subject areas in an ordered manner relevant to importance, and composing a sort of full account. And in line to the different phases, there's authors, an author referred to as an author team referred to as Braun and Clark in 2006 had highlighted a sort of a description of process aligned to the different phases. So, for example, becoming familiar with insights in context of the phases of a phase, the description of the process, for example, in around this is recording information, appraising insights, and putting them down into in a constructive on a constructive basis, and in around generating initial ciphered context is where encrypting stimulating structures of the information in a systematic on a systematic basis across the insights collected, gathering information relevant to ciphered context, in around identifying themes relating to sort of main subject area, gathering ciphered context into potential subject areas, and gathering all information relevant to each potential area as well. In around studying sort of the subject areas carefully, the description of process has basis in around establishing if important information relates back to ciphered context. So number one, as number one, where information relates back to cipher context, and number one, and all the information collected, and two, composing a thematic map of the inquiry, and in around the phase around placing subject areas in an ordered manner or an ordered basis relevant to importance. The description of the process has been documented as ongoing inquiry to polish specific insights regarding to subject area, and in relating to overall analyses, composing transparent descriptions and the names for each theme, and in around composing a full account as a phase. As one of the phases, the description of the process, for example, is composing a final account, providing detailed and persuasive instances relating to main subject area of a research question, and creating a report, and the data, and having sort of the data data that had been collected ready for presentation. So this works here in around coping in young people with CKD or chronic kidney disease. There's an overview that has been adapted from publication by Braun and Clark in 2006 in around this. So this ends this audio podcast on this basis in around sort of the methodology aspects and the interview guide basis, and the and some aspects in around the ethics approach and approval, and a basis in around the thematic analysis. So this has been an audio podcast aligned to the molecular storm gauge v.3. This is an audio podcast aligned to the Ztorm Logistic siege, and also once again an audio podcast aligned to another Ztorm Logistics production. Thank you.